Welcome back. In our previous section, we took a look at how we can deploy data visualizations for user adoption using a variety of approaches. In this section, we're going to reiterate the importance of using best practice principles. So we're going to tie things together with some of the fundamental best practices. What we're going to cover in the videos in this section, we'll start with an overview of best practice principles. This will be a bit of a refresher. And then we'll look at specific videos on cleaning up your displays, how to maximize focus so that the users can really get the most out of a data visualization, using size both in chart elements within and supporting the charts, how we can use color effectively, and then we'll conclude this section in the course talking about some additional styling options. So an overview of some of the best practice principles, and this is something that should be built into our DNA as we're constructing data visualizations. So we should always have best practices in mind, whether we're designing for print media or for interaction out on the web. Regardless, the same principles generally apply. And starting with a minimalist design approach is generally a good start. Keep things as clean and uncluttered as possible while still getting the message across. And then, of course, driving user focus, especially when we're doing an explanatory type of data visualization, we need to have a focus on what the message is that we're trying to convey. We can use size to help users more easily understand a visualization. So whenever it's appropriate and we want it to be accurate in the way it represents the data, but size is a very important consideration. Color, likewise, can help users more easily discern patterns in the data or categories in the data. And it can also, used well, add to the aesthetic appeal of a data visualization. And then secondary or supporting elements, things like titles and text boxes, can help direct the user. So let's begin talking about cleaning up the display. And what we're going to cover in this video is why clean and uncluttered data visualization are easier for users to understand, easier to comprehend than something where they've got to sift through a lot of extra charts or extra text in a data visualization. We want to talk about keeping only elements that are essential to the story, just enough in the data visualization to get across our message and direct users. And part and parcel of this is how to create enough white space and some visual order. We don't want a chaotic sort of flow to our data visualizations. And of course, some of the reasons why we do all of this is data analysts and visualizers, we're often tempted to show everything in our data set. And that's a very difficult thing to do. It's difficult to reconcile that level of detail with a good, clean display. So we need to figure out ways to optimize that. As we mentioned a moment ago, uncluttered data visualizations are much easier to navigate for an end user. And taking this sort of minimalist design practice gets us in the good habit of getting rid of unnecessary visual elements, and then we can zoom in to the real story in the data. So to recap that, we clean up our displays to just make it easy for the end user. As it is so often, it's about the end user and what we want them to get out of our data visualization. Looking at our previously seen Tableau dashboard on federal budget growth, this is our finished product here, where we've got a very clean layout, rather sparse, if you will. It's got some spacing. It's very clean and easy to read. And there's a nice general flow to it. There's a consistency with colors and generally what I would consider a clean, well-designed dashboard. Now let's work backwards and show some of the things that could make it less attractive to the user. What if we didn't provide spacing? So now, not too bad perhaps, but elements are running together a little bit, and it feels like we've just made it a slight bit easier to read by putting the spacing in. What if we started doing things like putting different colors in that aren't consistent with the rest of the dashboard? So now we've got multiple colors. They're inconsistent. There's really no purpose to them. And that's another way we would just not have a very clean dashboard. We likewise putting background colors in. We can do these sorts of things. Sometimes it makes things look more dramatic. And I know we've all seen data visualizations that do this sort of thing. But what we've done now is we've made it a little more difficult for the user to read. And now we'd have to go in and change the text color if we're using this background color. So probably easier to omit the background color in the first place. Similarly, if we use much larger text beyond the minimum, we can do this, but does it really add anything to our data visualization? I would argue that it's out of scale to what we want to do, and adding more size here actually gives us potentially less size to display the data. So again, let's keep that in a position where it's easy for the user to see. We don't have to make the font so large to draw their attention. Same sort of thing with titling. What if we made the titles really large, PowerPoint style? We can do that, but now we would have to decrease the size of all of our data elements in order to permit size for the text. Doesn't seem like a very good idea. And indeed, we would not do this in a well-designed dashboard. So these are some of the things you can see that would really work against having a clean, easy to read display. We want visual consistency. We like to have chart to chart the same colors as we've used for the lines here. We've got similar colors for the bars across charts. We've got consistent text colors. We've reiterated the red that we've used in the chart in the highlighted budget numbers here. So it's a very clean, consistent look, uses a minimal number of colors. Font sizes are consistent from display to display. And it's an example of a very easy to read, easy to use, easy to navigate data visualization for the end user. So in summary, keep your data visualizations as clean as possible, because the end goal is to help the users focus on the data and any stories that the data might tell or that they may discover in interrogating the data. And part of that is to avoid any secondary elements that don't provide guidance or context. And I might add to that, make these secondary elements as minimal as possible in supporting the data. So keep your titles small, keep your filters small, keep your drop downs as small as possible. And the end goal is always the data.